Hello, look at this. This is the biggest stage since my high school's production of Oklahoma, where I played Fred. Welcome to our webinar on walking together, investing in folk life in communities of color. I'm Joel Chapman, the program associate for folk and traditional arts. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white male with long blonde hair, speaking to you today from Baltimore, Maryland, where Mid-Atlantic Arts, where I work for, is headquartered. It is the unceded traditional lands of the Piscataway and Susquehannock peoples, and I am the program associate for folk and traditional arts at Mid-Atlantic Arts. I'm also joined here today by some of my excellent colleagues in various RAOs across the country. They're here to make sure I don't do anything out of line. You'll get to hear from all of them, but we're going to do a quick round robin right now to have everyone briefly introduce themselves. So I'll pass it to Adrienne first.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Adrienne Petrillo. I'm the Senior Program Director for Regional Grants at the New England Foundation for the Arts, or NEFA, as we're known. I am calling in from the land of the Massachusetts and the Pawtucket in the Boston area. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a white woman with brown hair wearing a black sweater. And I will pass it over to my colleague, Sei Jin.
Hello, I'm Sejin Yu, Program Coordinator for Regional Initiatives at the New England Foundation for the Arts. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an Asian woman with long black hair, wearing a beige striped sweater, and I'm calling in from Massachusetts, Wampanoag and Nipmuc lands, also in the Boston area. I'll pass it over to Taylor.
Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor Dooley Burden. I am the interim director of traditional arts at South Arts. Though today I'm calling in from Rockport, Indiana. I'm a white woman with brown hair wearing a tan jacket, and I'll pass it over to Christine.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Director of Arts and Humanities Grant Programs at Mid-America Arts Alliance. I'm calling in from my home in Lawrence, Kansas, which is on the land of the Kansa. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white middle-aged woman with shoulder-length hair wearing a dark green sweater. I'll pass it along now to Ellie.
Hey everyone. Lastly, I'm Ellie Dassler. I'm the program director for folk and traditional arts at Mid-Atlantic Arts. So I work with Joel. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with dark hair and glasses, big glasses. They take up most of my face. And I am calling in today from my home in Richmond, Virginia, which is the historic and contemporary lands of the Powhatan people. I'd also like to share before we get started that many of your organizations may be feeling some uncertainty in response to the news coming out of the federal government this week. Just want to share that we feel this uncertainty alongside you. We're lucky to have a private funder supporting Walking Together. So at the time of this webinar, we are moving forward with this program the way that we and our partners designed it. If you have questions about how potential changes to federal funding may affect the RAO's other programs, please don't hesitate to reach out to us outside of this webinar. We may not have all the answers as we're learning things the same time that you are, but we will do our best to share what we know and communicate any changes that affect our programs. And I hope you are taking care of yourselves and can find some time to rest. Thank you all for being here, and I will pass it back to Joel to get us started.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, everyone, for that excellent sound off. Thanks for everyone in the chat. I love reading the chat and seeing where everyone's coming in from today. It makes you human. So let's get into it. So we'll have a question and answer period at the end of today's webinar. We'll answer all your burning questions then. If you'd like to ask a question, simply type it into the Q&A box accessed through the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. You can ask questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll try to answer them all at the end. We also have live captions for today's webinar. Thank our live captioner who is here. It is a human. They are doing some good work for us. To turn on the captions, click More at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitles. For accessibility, guidelines are available at usregionalarts.org/walking together on PDF format and an accessible Word file. To request an accommodation at any point during your application process, contact me, Joel Chapman, at walkingtogether@midatlanticarts.org. Make sure to request any accommodations at least 2 weeks or 10 business days before the application deadline. What are we getting into today? Let's look at the agenda. We'll go through the most important parts of Walking Together application guidelines and how to get started on a self-nomination for your organization. And then we'll have questions and answers, as I mentioned earlier. Thank you.
So to tell you a little bit about who we all are, now that we've introduced ourselves, we all work at the U.S. Regional Arts Organizations, also known as RAOs. We are 6 different organizations, each serving a different part of the country. You can see the map on your screen of how we are divided up. So for instance, in New England, where I work, we are the tiny little part in the corner. So we all have regions that are very different in terms of the states, the size, and who we reach. Each RAO serves artists and arts organizations through our own set of programs and services. And we are all independent organizations, though we do work closely with the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as each of our state arts agencies, but we are not government agencies. And we are funders. That is what we do. That is part of why we're here today. But we are also, as organizations, we are actually all 501c3 organizations, which means we also have to fundraise for our work. So we have been on the grant seeking side of things as well and understand that perspective. In addition to each program that the different RAOs offer, we also work together at times. And so Walking Together is an example of one of those collaborations. We're really excited to be working together to launch this new program. And it is led by our colleagues, Ellie and Joel at Mid-Atlantic Arts. If you want to know more about your regional arts organization, I recommend going to the website where you can kind of find our links, go to each of our websites, and you can learn more about what each of us does. Many of us, we all offer programs that serve constituents in our regions, but some of us also do programs that are national as well. And you can learn about a lot more about the RAOs at usregionalarts.org. Thank you.
So, as you've seen, the tagline for Walking Together is investing in folk life in communities of color. And you may or may not be familiar with that term, that buzzword, folk life. And if you aren't, then I'm happy to share with you today about what that means, especially for this program. And when we think of folk life, we think of the art of everyday life. And folk life is a broad term that includes art forms, but other creative expressions that reflect the aesthetics, practices, values, and beliefs of community groups such as families, geographic communities, heritage groups, and more. And many of us, especially at our RAOs, we call these traditional arts. These traditional arts are often passed down from one generation to another. This can be learned in an institutional or academic setting, but also just intergeneral transmission, going from family member to family member, from community member to another. All traditions are connected to the history of the communities that practice them. But they are not just art forms of the past. Instead, they are living traditions that adapt to remain relevant in a changing world, including new and emerging traditions. Individuals and communities use traditional arts to build collective power, engage in healing, and strengthen their identity, especially in these times that we're currently experiencing. But traditional arts includes visual arts such as crafts, performing arts like traditional dance, music, and storytelling. But it also includes things that might be outside of what you traditionally think of when you think of folk and traditional art, like food and medicine traditions, like traditional agriculture, recipes, seed saving, hunting, foraging, and even community and community history and oral history, among many other things. And we recognize that folk life goes by many other names, so you might use a different word to describe your traditions in your community, especially as you're thinking about this opportunity and how you might be starting your self-nomination. So next we'll look at some examples of what folk life is. And when you look at these pictures, you'll see lots of examples of, excuse me, folk life or traditional art. This includes specific objects and activities like pottery, gospel music, breakdancing, food preparation, traditional agriculture, such as with a photo of the woman harvesting with a machete, and traditional clothing. But we can think deeper and look at the cultural context of these things too. We can learn about what the pottery is made from, how it's decorated, who is dancing, how they learned, when certain foods are prepared, what songs the drummers are playing, when they would play them, who they'd play them for. And we can think about the role these traditional arts play in someone's identity. So thinking more than just about the art form itself and the way in which it's practiced and shared within communities. These are all the dimensions of what we call folk life. People who practice, study, and support folk life have been wrestling over how to define it for more than 100 years. And if you're familiar with folk and traditional arts, it's something that we still often talk about and discuss. But I think this is really a strength rather than a weakness. And like the concept itself, the word folk life remains a flexible lens to look through the homegrown art forms that are used for expression, communication, and so much more. So that's why we're using this word folk life. You might use a different word for it, and if so, that's okay. If you have questions about whether something counts as folk life, as we've discussed, it can be really broad. It probably does. But feel free to reach out to us and talk about how you think through these concepts, how they apply to you and your community, and especially how we're applying them to the Walking Together program.
So, what is Walking Together? We're 15 minutes in, we're finally getting to it. So, Walking Together, Investing in Folk Life in Communities of Color is a national funding program, a new national funding program that supports folk life. So, all those traditions and creative practices that Taylor just shared about, rooted in communities of color in the United States. This includes any and all traditions that are practiced by members of Alaska Native, Arab, Asian, Black and African American, Caribbean, Indigenous, Native American, Latina, Middle Eastern and North African, Native Hawaiian, and Native Pacific Islander communities, and many more. Walking Together will provide $15,000 awards to 6 traditional practitioners in each RAO region. So it's a total of 36 artists or practitioners around the country. And in addition, we will give a $50,000 award to one organization or collective in every state or jurisdiction. So that's 56 total organizational awards. These grants have very few restrictions. For example, there is no match requirement, so you do not have to find other funding from another source in order to receive it. The funding also does not have to be spent on a specific project. It's designed to cover whatever your organization needs to build its capacity, keep its lights on, and continue its important work caring for the traditions and practitioners of your communities.
Both organizations and individual artists or practitioners can apply for Walking Together. Today, we're focusing on the organizational requirements. If you want to learn more about self-nominating as an individual practitioner, we recommend you join our webinar next Tuesday, February the 4th at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, which will focus on the individual application. Different kinds of organizations and collectives are eligible for Walking Together. This includes nonprofits, but your organization does not need to have nonprofit status to self-nominate. Other eligible organizations include local, state, and tribal governments, educational institutions like university centers or departments, and businesses. Fiscal sponsorships are also allowed but not required. Please note, though, that if your organization receives Walking Together funds, it is taxable income. Businesses will be responsible for claiming Walking Together on their taxes, and there will be tax support resources available for grantees who need it. No matter what kind of organization you have, you must be based in one of the 56 U.S. states and non-state jurisdictions that the regional arts organizations serve. You have to be on that map that we showed earlier in this presentation. In your nomination, you need to show that your organization has been supporting folk life in your community for at least 3 years. And your organization should have an annual budget of less than $500,000. Since budgets can fluctuate from year to year, that $500,000 can be an average of the last 3 fiscal years. Your organization may be much smaller than that even. You could be a volunteer-based organization with a budget of only a few $100s. But if you are really doing the work, your organization is eligible. Most importantly, you have to be doing the work of supporting folk life rooted in communities of color. This should be central to your organization's mission. What you say is important, but also your activities, what you actually do. This might include presenting or exhibiting traditional artists, providing money or other resources to traditional artists, running folk arts education and training programs. You could be a community hub where people come together to practice their traditions. Or perhaps you're a documentation sort of organization, documenting and storytelling about your community's traditions and its artists. You can be an arts organization, but you don't have to be. You could also be a community center, an advocacy or activist organization. You could run a social services organization or be a local government agency, an artist collective, a media company, even a local business with a major dedication to presenting local traditional arts, like a thriving live traditional music venue, for example. All of those are eligible to apply.
So we'll now dive into how you can self-nominate for your organization if you meet all those eligibility requirements. There are 2 stages in the Walking Together application process. Today, we're going to talk mostly about the first round, the self-nominations, which are open right now. A select number of nominees will be invited to complete a full application over the summer in round 2, and the grantees will be chosen from that invited group. But the self-nomination form, again, what's open right now, is a short form about your organization's work that expresses your interest in applying for Walking Together. The deadline for those self-nominations is Wednesday, March 19th, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. There are 3 different ways you can complete a self-nomination. The first is written in our online form via Mid-Atlantic Arts grant portal, which is called Smart Simple at midatlanticarts.smartsimple.com. You may also answer all the questions verbally and submit one recorded answer to the questions. That recording should be no longer than 5 minutes, and you'll also submit that recording through the Smart Simple grant portal. If you want to submit an audio self-nomination, please see the guidelines for more information about file formats and additional details, and of course, reach out if you have any questions. Lastly, you can request a printed hard copy of the self-nomination, fill it out, and return it by mail to Mid-Atlantic Arts. Again, please see the guidelines for more details, and you can email walkingtogether@midatlanticarts.org or call us at the number on the screen to request a hard copy. Those hard copies are first come, first serve, so if you think you might want one, let us know as soon as you can. If you choose to apply online, though, either with written or audio responses, you will visit, like I said, midatlanticarts.smartsimple.com. If you've applied to Mid-Atlantic Arts before, you can log in using your existing credentials. But if you haven't, you will need to create an account. If you've applied for funding from a different RAO before, but not Mid-Atlantic Arts, you will still need to make a new account. So you'll click the button at the bottom left of the login screen that says Register and select your type of organization. Organization profile types include registered nonprofits, units of state, local, and federally recognized tribal governments, and other organizations. Other is basically for all organizations that are not in the first 2 categories, in particular those that are not tax exempt. So if you're self-nominating on behalf of a business, a state recognized tribe, or an artist collective and don't have nonprofit status, you'll choose Other. You'll fill out some basic information about your organization and provide contact information for a primary contact person, and then submit the registration. You'll need to activate your registration by finding a confirmation email in your inbox that will come from noreply@smartsimple.com. and there'll be a link in that email that will let you create a new password and log in. If you don't see the email, be sure to check your spam folder. It likes to hide in there sometimes, but you will need to activate it with that email. We have a step-by-step registration guide with pictures for each type of registrant that are linked in the Walking Together guidelines. So check that out if you want to follow along and get some more help with how to register. Once you log in, you will see your Smart Simple dashboard. It looks like that first picture at the top of the screen with all the little icons. You'll scroll down to Available Applications and click on the big purple number above Funding Opportunities. Then you'll find Walking Together in the list of available opportunities. That part's easy. It's the first one, so you don't have to look very far. And that will take you to the self-nomination form. Click Save Draft to officially save your application in the system. And be sure to save often as you work on it so you don't lose your progress. You can leave the form, come back, and continue to edit it as long as you've saved it and you have not yet submitted. And on your dashboard, you can scroll down. There's a section called In Progress Applications, and that's where you'll find your in progress self-nomination form to keep editing it before you submit.
So what do organizations need to fill out in their self-nomination? The form will include 2 narrative questions, a community support sample, and 2 other recommended work samples. Here are the 2 narrative questions. The first is the organization statement. In 400 words, tell us about your organization. Share a brief history and explain what your organization does to care for traditions and traditional artists. Why is this work important to your organization? The second is a community sustainability statement. In 400 words, why is your organization and its work important to your community? Share an example of how your organization helps your community's traditions continue to thrive in the future. You do not need to use the full 400 words if you are filling this out as a written narrative. If you are submitting an audio, please make sure to answer these 2 questions in one recording under 5 minutes. In addition to answering your narrative questions, you must submit one example of community support, and we recommend you do so in PDF format. Some examples of this may be a letter of support from a mentor or community leader, a partnership letter describing a successful collaboration, or a description of a successful program that shows evidence of community involvement. Lastly, you may submit work samples to support your application and help reviewers understand your community's traditions, your organization's work, and your connection to community better. Some examples of this may be a link to a website or social media that showcases your organization. This could also be a link or a photo of a local news feature that recognizes your organization. This could also be a photo or video of a successful community event, or audio or video excerpts that your organization has produced and are proud of. The reviewers will only spend about 5 minutes looking over your work samples, so please be selective and only choose 2 to 3 total samples to share. You can find more details on formats and limitations in the guidelines. In each RAO region, a diverse panel including folklorists, cultural workers, artists, practitioners, and culture bearers will review round 1 self-nominations. They will recommend a small pool of applicants, which the RAOs will invite for round 2. We'll invite about 168 organizations to round 2. This will be 3 from each state or jurisdiction. The panel will review self-nominations based on 3 criteria. The first is organization commitment. Organizations that score a full 20 points for organizational commitment will show a history of deep commitment to their traditions. They will understand the history, context, and living importance of their traditions and how to represent those traditions well. Future sustainability. Organizations that score a full 40 points for this criteria will show how their organizations help to strengthen the sustainability of their traditions into the future. This may include creating, teaching, sharing, presenting, or advocating for their traditions within their community and/or beyond. Lastly, community support. Organizations that score a full 40 points for this criteria will show how their organizations are deeply embedded in their community. Other community members or organizations recognize them as a leader, resource, or steward for their traditions. This includes a demonstrated history of successful leadership and/or collaboration with other community members or organizations. So how big your organization is, what kind of organization it is, or what your financial needs might be. These are not criteria for round one, just these 3 criteria listed here. Please make sure you understand them well so that the reviewers can find each criteria easily in your answers and get you as high a score as possible.
Here are a few tips to keep in mind as you work on your self-nomination. First, make sure you read the program guidelines really carefully. These guidelines are your one-stop shop for all things walking together. Read the list of eligibility criteria carefully in the Who is Walking Together For section. Make sure they all apply to your organization. Think carefully about which self-nomination format you want to use. Make sure you understand the goals of the program and take advantage of all the support resources that are listed on pages 20 and 21. Start early. Give yourself plenty of time to register in Smart Simple or request a hard copy application. Ask us questions, fill out the form, get your community support sample together, review everything carefully, and then submit. Do not wait until the last minute. The closer it gets to the due date, the more questions we get and the harder it is for us to answer you quickly. Also, as much as we love Smart Simple, don't trust it too much. You know technology. Keep a copy of your answers in a Word document so it is an easy cut and paste into the Smart Simple form if something goes wrong. And keep in mind that there will be a lot of people using it toward the end of the self-nomination period. Don't let technical difficulties keep you from submitting on time. To make sure we have a fair process, we cannot accept any late self-nominations. If you turn yours in at 12:02 a.m. Eastern Time on March 20th, it's late, and our reviewers will not read it. So give yourselves plenty of time. Speaking of reviewers, although they all have experience with traditional arts, folk life in the United States is so diverse. It's impossible for them to be experts in every community's traditions. Even if your organization is very well known in your community, you should assume the reviewers are meeting you for the first time. Now is not the time to be modest. Give the reviewers the juicy details about your organization's history, how you work within your community, and the importance of the traditions you support. Don't leave them with questions about who you are or what you do. Make your work samples work for you. Think about what kind of organization you are and what traditions you focus on. Different kinds of work samples will be better for different organizations. If you present a lot of traditional music or host jam sessions and music lessons, for instance, a video work sample might be a good choice. If you're really active on social media, maybe you produce media content, or you do documentary storytelling work, or you have a podcast. Share a link to that. If you give your own funding or other kinds of resources to traditional artists, like legal or social support, you might want to include some testimonials from those artists or statistics about how many you've supported over the years. Think about what you're really proud of. And like Say said, be selective. Quality is better than quantity when it comes to work samples. When you finish writing or recording your narrative questions, when you've picked all your samples, look back at the review criteria. What score would you give yourself? Are you covering each criterion? Remember, that's what the reviewers use to recommend folks for round 2. So make those criteria your best friend. And lastly, come talk to us. We have a whole team of Walking Together advisors, some you've met here and others that would love to support you. So we want to talk to you about your self-nomination. Please reach out.
We're all talkers. Call us, please. Find your region on our website, and then you'll know who your advisor is and who you need to have a conversation with. We can help you narrow down what you should focus on in your narrative responses. We can help recommend what kind of work samples you should submit. We can help you decide whether to self-nominate. We all have office hours where you can drop in without an appointment. Visit usregionalarts.org/walkingtogether or go to the guidelines to find more information about that. And if those dates for the drop-in sessions don't work for you, reach out and we'll have a conversation on your schedule as best we can. We have a pipe dream that we'll talk to every nominee before they submit their self-nomination, and only you can help us make that dream a reality. So don't be a stranger. And I also love jokes, so please call me and tell me your long-form jokes as well. That's a side note. Right before we go into the question and answers, here are the important dates one more time for you to keep at the top of your mind. Round one self-nominations are due on Wednesday, March 19th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Pay attention to that time zone. If you're on the West Coast, your self-nomination is due at 8:59 p.m. If you're in Hawaii, it's due at 6:59. So, be mindful of that. Don't be late. Everyone will find out if they're moving on to round two or not by June 5th. That's also when the round two application will be available to those selected to move on. That round two application will be due July 21st, and all final grantees will be announced in October. If you receive funding, your award year will be calendar year 2026. That year is when you'll participate in evaluation of the program and connect more with your RAOs. So we'll move on to question and answers. Thanks everyone for coming here today. I see we already have a good amount down at the bottom. I also see some question and answers going into the chat, and I just want to remind you that we'll try to get to those, but if those might get buried with all the other great things that are happening in the chat. So if you put your question in the chat, I would encourage you to go down to the question and answer at the bottom bar. For me, it's on the right side. It might look a little different from you. It says Q&A with a little question in a box and a dialogue box. So make sure you put them in there, and we're going to start working our way through these now because we got about 27 minutes left here, and we have already 23 questions. So first question I see here. If we apply as an organization/artist collective, can we also still apply as individual artists? If so, is there any benefits or drawbacks to doing so? What do we think?
I can start answering this one. So, of course, we know that there are lots of artists and practitioners who also maybe own a business or founded a nonprofit organization or just work in another capacity for an organization that also works with traditional arts. The short answer is yes. The same person can be the contact associated with an organizational application and can also apply as an individual artist. We would sort of treat those as two separate entities, but if you work for an organization and you yourself are also an artist, you can submit two separate self-nominations. In order to do that, you would need to have two accounts in Smart Simple with two different email addresses associated with them, one for the organization self-nomination and one for yours as an independent person. There are some other, of course, differences. It would not affect your sort of likelihood of receiving a grant, if that's what you mean by benefits or drawbacks. The review process for those two sides of the grant are separate. However, of course, there are other differences such as tax responsibilities, the amount of the funding, and if you want to have a more personalized conversation about what would be best for you, I recommend you reach out to your RAO advisor.
Thank you, Ellie. We have another question. Will this video be sent out today? Yes, this is recorded, and we will make it available on that website mentioned a few times during the presentation. Don't have it in front of me. usregionalarts.org/walkingtogether. Did I get it right?
You did.
Great. Next question. Will we be required to submit proof of our annual budget for the past 3 years?
In round one, no, we're going to take your word for it. So please be honest. If you make it to round two, you will have to submit a proof of financial eligibility. And that's also when we would ask for proof of your status as a government entity, if that applies to you, or tax incorporated status if you were an LLC or S Corp or something else. That will all be part of the invited application if you make it to round two.
Someone asked, not understanding how tribes and other governmental agencies could meet the 500K budget threshold, does this just apply to nonprofits?
So that's also a good question. This program is not necessarily intended for an entire governmental agency, but a center or department could apply, in which case we would be thinking about the budget of that center or department. So what realistically your entity has to work with in a given year. So you could be part of a tribal or local government, part of a university, for example, and that government overall or the university would of course have a much larger budget, we hope. But your particular center could be much smaller than that, and those are the types of constituents that Walking Together is for. So you may have like a parent entity, but we're talking about your budget, not the parent entity's budget, if that makes sense.
We have a question. Are there any budget restrictions to qualifying? This was asked early on.
I think we probably covered that in the webinar, but yes, there is that restriction of $500,000 a year or less. Again, that's an average over the last 3 years.
You all mentioned that this grant would be taxable income for a business. Is that the case for nonprofits as well?
If you're tax exempt, then no, this is not taxable income, but this opportunity is available to folks who do not have tax exemption. So if you're a nonprofit, it's a grant. It'll function how your grants usually do. But if you were a for-profit entity, then it is considered taxable income. And like I mentioned, there will be some tax support resources available for those folks if you receive a grant and you need extra help.
Someone asked, did I hear correctly that the grant award distributions for this program will award one grant per state/district? Is that a mandate or will that depend on the applicant pool?
Does somebody else want to respond to this one? I feel like I've been talking a lot. No?
Sure, I can answer. Yes, that is correct. It is one grant per state/district, and this is outlined in the original inception of the program and something that Mid-Atlantic is committed to.
Let's see here. Hello. Just to clarify from an earlier slide, if our organization is less than a year old, are we still able to apply?
So for this program, we do want you to demonstrate that you have a history of this work of at least 3 years. Again, that also would help you reach that criterion of community embeddedness. We are prioritizing organizations that have a little bit more of a history of this work than just 1 year.
Will it cause issues for us if some of our individual artists apply under that option as well, in addition to the organization submitting? I'm guessing they're talking about individuals that they'd be serving if they got the grant, if those individuals were also to apply.
I'll just jump in because I think you answered that earlier, right, Ellie, that there is nothing that plays against an application or a nomination rather for an organization that then an individual artist or practitioner applying of their own accord nominating themselves. So there's not there's no competition between the two, I guess I should say, because they will be reviewed separately from one another. So there is no conflict of interest or competition.
Someone asks, can Indigenous language preservation be a part of the self-nomination? We do music, dancing, cultural festival each summer. Yes, that is totally can be part of your self-nomination if that's what you want to highlight as work that you do and work that you want to continue supporting through this grant.
Yeah, I was really excited about that piece of it when we started talking about it, the fact that we can accept nominations from archivists and those kinds of folks too that are helping to preserve this work that's out there is really tremendous. What a great opportunity.
Someone asked, can you please speak more about examples of community support examples that we include with the self-nomination?
I think Joel touched on this. I think it was Joel, maybe. I know someone touched on this earlier, but if you have a link to a podcast, I saw that someone mentioned an article in the chat earlier, and especially if there is some sort of paywall for an article or maybe some other type of content, I would encourage you, especially if there is an article, to maybe submit a PDF of that, or print it and then scan it. Excuse me. Other options might be if there's a program that's been really successful or that highlights well a program that you're doing, or if there's an artist that you've worked with or funded, testimonials and some sort of document from either one of those groups, whichever makes more sense for your organization, submitting that. Of course, you can also include any type of media, which we know media can be, excuse me, broad, whether that's audio or video. And I think this is another example of why it's important to communicate with whoever your representative is, because they can help you identify what types of community support examples would be the best option for your organization type and for the way in which you want to submit your nomination to be the most competitive.
And I do want to make sure that we're drawing, I think that person was maybe, Taylor was talking mainly about the work samples, and the community support sample is a little bit different. So I want to make sure we're clear about the distinction between those things. The work samples can really be anything that will showcase the good work of your organization and why you're a good fit for this program. The community support sample is more kind of a cosign from a member of your community indicating that you are doing this work, that you are seen as a leader or an important community center or an important resource for traditional artists in your community. So you can submit, like I said, several work samples, but only one community support sample. And for that, you're probably looking for a document. We said, like Say said, we're recommending PDF format. So this could be like a letter of recommendation from an artist that you work with or another community leader. If you're worried about being able to have someone write you a letter in time, an example like a report from work or just from some work that you did, or just a description of the work that you did that shows that community was involved, that could work too. But basically it's just some sort of indication that someone other than you thinks that you're good at the work that you're doing, and that you might be a good fit for this program. So I hope that that makes sense, and like drawing the line between community support samples and work samples. And that is all outlined in the guidelines too, with some more like specific examples.
Yeah, and someone asked that exact question, what would community support look like? So I hope that answered you, what Ellie just said. Someone asked if an organization has been historically under 500K until this year, it may even come in under budget this year, can they apply? I believe it's an average of the last 3 years. Is that right? So as long as your average is underneath that, which it sounds like it should be, you should be in the clear.
Oh, this is a good question. We provide paid residencies for artists. So your work fits the criteria, but that's not explicitly stated in your mission statement. Would we qualify? I would say, and jump in, folks, that yes, that we're primarily concerned with the work that you're doing. So we highlight that mission and activities, meaning it's not enough just to have it in your mission statement. You have to actually be doing it, and the doing it is the important part. So yes, if that is a significant part of your work, a significant part of what your organization does, and you meet all the other criteria, of course, then I would encourage you to self-nominate. And you can find a link to the self-nomination form in the guidelines or on usregionalarts.org/walkingtogether.
Someone asks, are these funds intended to be general operating support or would they be program specific? These are for general operating, not programs. Are Middle Easterners considered people of color? Yes.
We're not operating on US Census data criteria here. It's a much broader definition than that.
If my nonprofit is based in California, but I work in the communities of California and Ohio, can I choose to work in Ohio? Yes, you can. You would probably want to apply through Arts Midwest then. Does that sound right, Ellie?
So the way the application, this is like sort of a technical question. The way that the application works will be based on sort of what state you would be applying under based on where you are incorporated. But you don't have to only work in that state in order to be eligible. You may have a larger reach. But in terms of what state our system will consider you to be applying from, it will be based on where you are incorporated as a legal entity.
Are there any eligibility issues with applying to other Mid-Atlantic arts funding programs in folk and traditional arts? Not with our folk and traditional arts programs, but you cannot receive what's it called? Cultural
Cultural
Sustainability
sustainability.
Grant and Walking Together Grant.
And that's the case nationwide. If you have received cultural sustainability or arts here funding through the US RAOs, you are not eligible for Walking Together. We know you might not necessarily know about cultural sustainability before you apply for Walking Together. That shouldn't stop you from applying. But if you receive cultural sustainability, if you find out about it in the middle of the review process for Walking Together, we will remove you from consideration. And if you have more questions about that, if that applies to you, talk to us one-on-one. But generally speaking, our other programs, there's no concern. Anybody else want to chime in for their own regions? If that's
With
different.
South Arts, it would not be a concern.
Yeah, I would say with NEFA, we've been asked this question too, especially because we do have some other national programs. It is not a conflict. As Ellie said, it's only if you were to get cultural sustainability or arts here. All of their NEFA programs, you can apply to those as well as Walking Together.
Should fiscally sponsored projects register as U.S. registered 501c3 nonprofit or as other organization?
So you'd be registering as a nonprofit using the EIN for your fiscal sponsor. And again, if you have specific questions about that, I recommend reaching out and we can help walk you through it.
If we use a news article for the work sample, how will the panel get around that paywall that some media outlets may have? That's a great question. I would recommend screenshotting with your computer and uploading as a picture. If you can download it, maybe you can get past the paywall. If you can download it as a PDF and upload it, I would recommend that. Make sure to check all of your links to make sure that there aren't paywalls because that can be a problem. Great question. If you want to figure out how to screenshot on your laptop, feel free to reach out to us. We can help you with that.
We have someone asking about the Tuesday webinar. Yes, you can find the link to register for that webinar at usregionalarts.org/walkingtogether.
I'll put it in the chat here in a second.
Thanks, Joel. Basically everything you can find at usregionalarts.org/walkingtogether. When in doubt, check there. Oh yeah, and that is a good question. If you are fiscally sponsored and your fiscal sponsor has a larger budget, again, we're looking at your budget, what you would be working with on an annual basis. So as long as you have a budget under the threshold, if you have a fiscal sponsor that has a larger budget, you're okay. Another question saying that we've been incorporated as a 501c3 or registered as a 501c3 for 2 years, but you've done work in the community for 8 years. I think you should self-nominate in that case. Again, we're looking for a demonstrated history, and you could have applied if you'd never become a 501c3, if you were just an organization. So if you can show that you've been working for at least 3 years and your community signs off on that, then you should still be eligible.
The link for the grant application is usregionalarts.org/walking together. You'll find it on that page. My organization has an opportunity to travel out of the country, and we're wondering if we're eligible. It went away. Ellie, did you remember
Oh, that was
that
me.
question?
Sorry. That was another, sorry, I
You
got
already
rid of
got
it too
that one.
quickly. That was another question about eligibility overlapping with another one of our programs. You can still apply for USAI and Walking Together. That's not a problem. We answered this earlier. The only questions that you, or the only programs that you can't double dip in are Arts Here and Cultural Sustainability. That one we already
Always
answered.
pulling the rug
I'm
out
clearing
from
some of the
under
things
me.
that we've answered more than once so that we can get down to the ones that are
Yeah.
new.
Ellie, if you don't mind, I do see a question in here where this person was asking, they're saying that they're a collective of artists fostering Mexican traditions and culture, but not a nonprofit. And I just want to bring that up because I feel like the question that you answered before, the one that you just answered, kind of speaks to that some that you don't necessarily have to be a nonprofit or a 501c3 to apply for these funds. So I just wanted to touch on that real quick since I'm not sure if we've said that explicitly. And I think in that same spirit, someone had asked if businesses or for-profit organizations could apply. So I don't know if you want to, I think I saw that in the chat earlier. I'm not sure if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so artist collectives are also eligible even if they are not registered as a 501c3. Presumably you have some sort of some sort of proof that you're an artist collective. And if your artist collective has any sort of incorporation of any kind of entity, then it is eligible. I don't think that was legally correct what I just said there, so somebody, but artist collectives are eligible. Okay. No, there will be one grant per state for organizations. There will be 6 grants for individual artists in every region. So there'll be 56 organizations and 36 individual artists nationwide. And that is basically so that we can make sure that we are spreading the funding around the country as much as possible. We are, as the RAOs, we do serve all 56 US states and jurisdictions, and we want to make sure that we are supporting an organization in every one of our constituent states and territories.
Ellie, there's a question about, or a request for us to talk a little bit about the scoring of these nominations and what will be weighted and that kind of thing.
Sure. So the criteria for the program that Say read out during the webinar portion, those are in the guidelines. There are 3 criteria that we're looking at for round 1. They are weighted a little bit differently. Organizational commitment is weighted at 20 points, and then future sustainability and community support are each weighted at 40 points. So that future sustainability and community support are really the most important things. But then also demonstrating your organization's commitment is, of course, also important, just a little bit, we're weighting it a little bit less. There's full descriptions of those criteria on the guidelines. And the reviewers, when they go in to look at your application, they will see a form with those 3 criteria and a place for them to put their score out of 20 or out of 40. And they will read your application. They'll decide how well they think it meets those criteria. They'll be looking at the same descriptions that you looked at when you wrote your application. And they'll give you a score. So like Sejan said, if you, in order to score 40 points on community support, you should show, I don't have the description in front of me right now, but you should show the full description of the criteria. And that's the same thing that the reviewers will look at. So it's a rubric, and then you'll have a final score. I hope that answers that question.
Someone was asking about the core differences between walking together and cultural sustainability. For that one, please email Ellie and I at walkingtogether@midatlanticarts.com, and we can talk with you more about that.
.org. If you does anybody else some of our other folks here worked more directly on cultural sustainability, if you want to answer that for the national perspective.
Sure, I can jump into
Right,
that. There are similarities between the programs in that they are looking to support arts organizations with budgets under $500,000 that are rooted in communities of color. But Walking Together is specifically focused on folk and traditional arts, as Taylor shared at the start of the presentation. It really is about supporting those working in folk life. Cultural sustainability was open to any and all types of organizations.
The guidelines say the org must be accountable to and predominantly serve communities of color, but how about programs that serve communities of color through programs but serve folk and traditional arts communities in general?
Again, I think in order to be the best a best fit for this program, that accountability in communities of color would be a really significant part of your organization's work. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the only. You could work across communities, but that working to support folk life rooted in communities of color should be a really significant commitment that your organization has as part of its activities.
I see a really great question here. If we receive, whoops, it moved up. If we receive significantly more self-applications, self-nominations, and invite many more full applications than what we can ultimately fund, is there a chance that we would name finalists or semifinalists so that those organizations can list that accomplishment on future applications for other grants? That's a really great question, one that I don't know that we've discussed and thought about.
Yeah, we haven't, but that's a really interesting question. Of course, there will be finalists. Like Say said, we'll invite about 160 organizations into round 2, 3 for every state or jurisdiction. We hadn't talked about publicizing that, but if that's something that folks are interested in, we can certainly consider it. And also, we will get many more self-nominations than we have to fund. We frankly already have, but we're hoping that Walking Together will be a first step for we as the RAOs to be able to connect with all of you, and that even if you don't receive funding through Walking Together, you'll be connected with your RAO. You can stay in touch with us. You can pursue future opportunities. We can help shape our future opportunities around your needs and your community's needs, and that this will lead to us having longer term relationships with all of the applicants, even if they don't receive funding this go around. But that's a really interesting suggestion about publicizing the finalists. I think we should think about that.
And I am seeing a follow-up to that, just some asking for clarification that there are only 3 finalists per state being invited, or basically 3 organizations per state being invited to round 2. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, Ellie?
Sure, that's the plan. I'll just say maybe our reasoning behind that. The self-nomination form is intentionally short so that you're spending what we think is a fair amount of time working on the application. And if you make it to round 2, we want you to have a really good chance of getting the grant, so that the time and energy that you put into completing the full application is appropriate for the percent chance that you have to get funding. So it is going to be really competitive. The finalist pool is going to be small, but we just don't want all of you to put a ton of labor and time into an application that we know is going to be really competitive. It's a good question. And we are at time. It is 4:30. So I think we will go ahead and say goodbye for today. If we didn't get to your question, find your RAO staff advisor and ask them your question. Come to our office hours, send us an email, give us a call. We can't wait to hear from you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing a little. You've already shared a little bit about who you are in the chat. And that's great. So we can't wait to hear from you again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm going to stop recording for us, Joel.